A very good morning to all. Dear student, hope all of you are well and staying at home. Okay, after a few days of gap, now we came back to our classes. So today I am going to start biology class of class 9, that is chapter 7, diversity in living organisms. Before starting our class, please be ready with your book. Diversity in living organisms. What is meant by diversity? Diversity means understanding that each individual is unique and also recognizing our individual differences. The differences can be in race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socio-economic status, age, physical abilities, etc. The world consists of countless organisms living in various environments, such as land, water, snow, deserts, and forests, and in grassland. All these organisms consist of cells. Cells are the building blocks of life and one of the most important characteristics of living organisms. They are structural units of life carrying out specific functions. A group of such cells form a tissue. Diversity in living organisms can be experienced everywhere on Earth. The warm and humid regions of the Earth are highly diverse and are called the region of mega diversity. 12 countries in the world have more than half of the biodiversity in the world. India is one of them. Now, think of all the different forms in which life occurs on Earth. On one hand, we have microscopic bacteria of a few micrometer in size, while on the other hand, we have blue whale and redwood trees of California of approximate size of 30 meters and 100 meters respectively. Some pine trees live for thousands of years while insects like mosquitoes die within a few days. Life also ranges from colorless or even transparent worm to brightly colored birds and flowers. This variety of life around us have evolved on the earth over millions of years. However, we do not have more than a tiny fraction of this time to try and understand all these living organisms. So, we cannot look at them one by one. Instead, we look for similarities among the organisms, which will allow us to put them into different classes and then study different classes or groups as a whole. In order to make relevant group to study the variety of life forms, we need to classify the organisms according to their important characteristics. Now, what is a classification? Classification: the arrangement of the organism in groups on the basis of their similarities and differences is known as classification. What is the basis of classification? Over millions of years, we have seen diversity in living beings. We have evolved from ape-like beings to Homo sapiens. We look for similarities between organisms so that we can classify them into classes and hence study them as a whole. For these fundamental characteristics need to be decided, which would form the foundation for classifying. Classification can be carried out based on many factors such as presence of nucleus, body design, make up of cells, single cell or multicellular cell organisms, production of food, level of the organization in bodies of organisms carrying out photosynthesis. In animals, an organization of one's body parts, development of body, specialized organs for different functions. These features can differ in both plants and animals as they differ in their body design. Hence, this prominent design and characteristic features can be used to make subgroups and not a broad classification. Attempts at classifying living things into groups have been made since time immemorial. Greek thinker Aristotle classified animals according to whether they live on land, in water, or in the air. This is a very simple way of looking at life, but misleading too. For example, animals that live in the sea include corals, whales, octopuses, starfish, and sharks. We can immediately see that these are very different from each other in numerous ways. In fact, their habitat is the only point they share in common. This is not an appropriate way of making groups of organisms to study and think about. We therefore need to decide which characteristics to be used as the basis for making the broadest division. Then we will have to pick the next set of characteristics for making subgroups within these divisions. This process of classification within each group can then continue using new characteristics each time. Before we go on, we need to think about what is meant by characteristics. When we are trying to classify a diverse group of organisms, we need to find ways in which some of them are similar enough to be thought of together. These ways, in fact, are details of appearance or behavior, in other words, form and function. What we mean by a characteristic is a particular form or a particular function. That most of us have 5 fingers on each hand is thus a characteristic. That we can run but the banyan tree cannot, it also a characteristic. Now, to understand how some characteristics are decided as being more fundamental than other, let us consider how a stone wall is built. The stones used will have different shapes and size. The stones at the top of the wall would not influence the choice of stone that comes below them. On the other hand, the shape and size of stones in the lowermost layer will decide the shape and size of the next layer, and so on. The stones in the lowermost layer are like the characteristic that decided the broadest division among living organisms. They are independent of any other characteristic in their effect on the form and function of the organism. The characteristics in the next level would be dependent on the previous one and would decide the variety in the next level. In this way, we can build up a whole hierarchy of mutually related characteristics to be used for classification. Nowadays, we look at many interrelated characteristics starting from the nature of the cell in order to classify all living organisms. What are some concrete examples of such characteristics used for a hierarchical classifications? A eukaryotic cell has membrane-bound organelles including a nucleus, which allow cellular processes to be carried out efficiently in isolation from each other. Therefore, organisms which do not have a clearly demarcated nucleus and other organelles would need to have their biochemical pathways organized in very different ways. This would have an effect on every aspect of cell design. Further, nucleated cells would have the capacity to participate in making a multicellular organism because they can take up specialized functions. Therefore, this is a basic characteristics of classification. Do the cells occur singly or are they grouped together, and do they live as an indivisible group? Cells that group together to form a single organism use the principle of division of labor. In such a body design, all cells would not be identical. Instead, groups of cells will carry out specialized functions. This makes a very basic distinction in the body designs of organisms. As a result, an amoeba and a worm are very different in their body designs. Do organisms produce their own food through the process of photosynthesis? Being able to produce one's own food versus having to get food from outside would make very different body designs necessary. Of the organisms that perform photosynthesis, plants, what is the level of organization of their body? Of the animals, how does the individual's body develop and organize its different parts, and what are the specialized organs found for different functions? We can see that even in these few questions we have asked, a hierarchy is developing. The characteristics of body design used for classification of plants will be very different from those important for classifying animals. This is because the basic designs are different based on the need to make their own food or acquire it. Therefore, these design features having a skeleton, for example, are to be used to make subgroups rather than making broad groups. Classification and evolution. All living things are identified and categorized on the basis of their body design in form and function. Some characteristics are likely to make more wide-ranging changes in body design than others. There is a role of time in this as well. So, once a certain body design comes into existence, it will shape the effects of all other subsequent design changes simply because it already exists. In other words, characteristics that came into existence earlier are likely to be more basic than characteristics that have come into existence later. This means that the classification of life forms will be closely related to their evolution. What is evolution? Most life forms that we see today have arisen by an accumulation of changes in body design that allow the organism possessing them to survive better. Charles Darwin first described this idea of evolution in 1859 in his book The Origin of Species. When we connect this idea of evolution to classification, we will find some groups of organisms which have ancient body designs. that have not changed very much. We will also find other groups of organisms that have acquired their particular body designs relatively recently. Those in the first group are frequently referred to as primitive or lower organism, while those in the second group are called advanced or higher organism. So primitive or lower means what? Those organisms who are ancient, we can say ancient, who are grown very early age are called as the primitive or the lower, and nowadays the organisms which are grown now are called as the advanced or the higher organism. In reality, these terms are not quite correct since they do not properly relate to differences. All that we can say is that some are older organisms while some are younger organisms. Okay, so this is primitive or lower or advanced or higher will be not so correct because it is not related all the differences there. That's why we can say the older organisms or the younger organisms. So those organisms who are grown earlier are called as the older organism, and those who are growing now are called as the younger organisms. Okay, there is a possibility that complexity in designs will increase over evolutionary time. It may also not be wrong to say that older organisms are simpler while younger organisms are more complex. So older organisms are very simple, their body designs are very simple, their lifespan is very simple, but nowadays the complex organism, the younger one, they have a very complex characteristics. Okay, so that's all for today's class. In the next class we'll learn more about the diversity in living organisms, how the classification will be doing, how we'll study what are their types, everything we'll learn in the next class. But before finishing my class, here are some home assignment questions for you. Write down the answer and send me in WhatsApp group. Thank you and have a nice day.